getting some great perspectives from around the country. I think this is a tremendous educational process for me. I hope it is for you. My name is Ron Calzone. I am director of Missouri First. And Paul's asked me to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Missouri. I think probably each state faces a little different challenge. Than other states do. And I'm sure that Missouri is as unique in some fashions, but similar to others. Before I do that, though, Paul, I'm compelled to talk about a few constitutional principles, because Missouri First is all about promoting constitutional governance, after all. And Missouri First has spent 7 or 8 years in the Missouri General Assembly trying to lobby on what we call orphan issues. These are the kind of issues that don't have a lot of money behind them. These are the kind of issues that don't have big organizations behind them. But these are the types of issues that affect the typical average family who doesn't always have the time and the resources to go to Washington, D.C. or their state capital and influence the process. Well, guess what? After 7 or 8 years, what we would run into time and time again are roadblocks. And the roadblocks are typically the big funded lobbyists and the special interests with all kinds of resources that influence the legislative process at the expense of typical Missourians in our case. And ultimately, and our latest issue has been that of eminent domain abuse. Remember back in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court said that it's okay for a big box store to take your home or your business or your farm and build another shopping center. Because after all, they're going to generate more tax revenue, they're going to provide more jobs than your farm does or your house or your little business does. That's an affront to everything that America stands for. And all the polls indicate that anywhere from 85 to 95% of Americans favor fixing that problem, telling the U.S. Supreme Court they were wrong, and reestablishing the core American principle of true property rights. Well, with 90% of the people in favor of reform, why can't we get something meaningful through the legislatures? Well, we haven't, typically. A couple states have done something meaningful. A lot of states have done something, but they were placebos. And so the eminent domain issue, I think, underscores the need for the people to rise up and do something that their legislators, who are influenced by, in our case, the big developers with all the money, the people need some mechanism to rise up and do something about it. A mechanism in which they can all contribute a little bit and collectively accomplish a lot. Well, in order to understand the importance of that, I think we need to understand some core constitutional issues. And these are kind of the things that motivates Missouri First. And I think at the core of it is these are probably the things that motivate all of you. I think some of the three principles I think are probably most important with respect to constitutional governance is the understanding that our rights, our liberties are inalienable. They are from our Creator, not from other men. That's the single most important thing I think we have to understand. The next most important thing is that government exists at the consent of the governed, and that all political power originates and emanates from the people. And the people convey certain amounts of power to government for specific reasons, I might add. The people join together in society and they form government for their own purpose. And we're not in America, we're not conquered people who live in subjection to conquerors. We're people who decided to join together in a social compact and form a society for specific reasons. I'll get to that in just a minute. And so the primary role of this society, this government that people form, is the protection of their property. Now, when I say property, I don't mean bricks and mortar and soil and cars and laptop computers and fishing rods. When I say property, I mean it in the sense that the founders meant it. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Those are our property. Madison and John Locke, for instance, had some great things to say about those sort of things. So what do? We form a society. The people give up a certain amount of their liberty, a measured amount of their liberty, a small amount of their liberty, to establish a government for their own mutual good. We recognize, though, understanding, our founders recognize, understanding eons of history that anytime you give anybody power, they tend to accumulate for themselves more power. So what we do, we build in checks and balances that have been mentioned. And we have things like separation of power have been mentioned. We have things like checks and balances, one branch of government having a check on another, the legislative and the judiciary on the legislative and so forth. We understand about checks and balances, but the thing we need to keep in mind is that the ultimate check on this government that the people created for their own purpose are our Second Amendment rights. Our Second Amendment rights. And anybody forget what Second Amendment rights are? Okay. Those are the rights that ultimately can be quite bloody and quite nasty. But in order that we not have to go that far, the founders recognized the importance of our First Amendment rights. Our rights to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and politically, as it applies to political issues, keeps us from having to resort to our Second Amendment rights. Those aren't platitudes, folks. I'm serious. You go back and you look at history, anytime that people are squelched and they don't have an opportunity for a true redress of grievances, ultimately it results in violence. The I&R process, folks, is a peacekeeping process. It keeps us, maybe not in the next 10 years, maybe not even the next generation, but ultimately it'll keep America from a bloody revolution if we respect the I&R process. It's critically important. The Missouri Constitution has a clause I've got to share with you. Try to share it close to the microphone. This is Article 3, Section 49 of the Missouri Constitution. I love, and probably, and I looked up Oklahomans, I can't remember verbatim how it reads, it's got something equivalent to this, but Missouri's wording is better, frankly. It says, the people reserve power. The people that convey power to government, to establish society, it says the people reserve power to propose and enact or reject laws and amendments to the Constitution by the initiative independent of the General Assembly. And they also reserve power to approve or reject by referendum any act in the General Assembly, except as it herein provided. Anybody wonder why the General Assemblies typically want to curtail the initiative process? The initiative process is intended to curtail the General Assemblies. It's supposed to operate independent of them. And so one of the things that I'm going to conclude, and one of the things I'm going to, and I am really in just a minute, Paul, going to talk about what's going on in Missouri, okay? And one of the things I'm going to conclude is, one of the things I'm going to tell our legislators is if you want to curtail this constitutional liberty that the people reserve for themselves, then do it through an amendment to the Constitution. Don't try to regulate it out of existence. The principles that we're talking about, I can't talk to a group of people for more than 3 minutes without talking just briefly about John Locke. Anybody remember who John Locke was? John Locke was one of the few founders that I think had the most influence. I mean, one of the few men who had the most influence on the founders. I would argue that maybe he had the most of all of them. And John Locke, in describing society and government, in his second treatise on civil government published in 1689, he said, people join in society with others for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberties, and estates. Sound familiar? Lives, liberties, and estates. He says, which I call by the general name property. See, so Locke said lives, liberties, and estates. That's summed up by the word property. The great and chief end thereof of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves to the preservation of their property. That's the reason that we, folks, form government. And then he went on to write, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, life, liberty, and estates, or reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. See, the founders read Locke. The founders understood Locke, and the